Hi there, I'm DG Wright, founder and chancellor of the BLS Coin Collectors Club. Here on our official channel we bring you news and insight from the fascinating world of numismatics. If you enjoy our content, please leave us a like and a comment, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You can also follow us on our social media feeds seen below. Hello, welcome back to the BLS Coin Collectors Club official YouTube. Today, we are not doing the half pennies that I promised. We are just looking at some completely random coins, just for the hell of it. So let's get going. What have we got here? We got Old Faithful. We got the 1797 cartwheel 2p. Probably one of the biggest coins ever made in the history of the United Kingdom. It is a absolute unit, as they say these days. I love a cartwheel coin. I've had several of the pennies over the years. This is the first time I've had a 2p. I got this probably a year and a half ago now. It's been a little while, and I keep it nice and safe in this little felt-lined box because I do not have any coin flips big enough for it. Moving on, we got... These are in coin flips, some of them are, some of them aren't. So we got an Edward I silver penny, type 3G, made in 1280 or 81. As you can see, still fairly visible there, the King's portrait and the inscription, Edward Rex Angliae. Edward, King of England. All these were made at the London Mint. You can see from the reverse, Civitas London, City of London. This one is type 6B, made between 1292 and 1296. Make sure I got this the right way up at some point. Yep, there we go. You can tell the varieties and types by how the king's portrait is depicted and the inscriptions on the obverse. Sometimes the king's name is abbreviated to EDW or just ED sometimes. Sometimes it's Edouard or Edouard. Very occasionally you'll see it written out in full. This one is type 9B2, made in 1299 or 1300. As you can see, this still is in very good condition for its age. It's you can still make out the fine details of the king's portrait, except his eyes, apparently. I guess we have a blind King Edward. So anyway, that's that, and here is the last of my Edward I silver pennies. This is a type 10 AB5, minted in 1305. As you can see, you can make out most of the details. As you can see, it says Edouard on this one. Edouard Rex. Ang et Hib. Angliae et Hiberniae. King of England and Scotland. As you can see, it says Edouard here. Some of them just say EDW. That is my Edward I pennies. And now we're on to something a little more entertaining. We have a horribly corroded 1952 penny, which seems to have spent most of its life either underwater or buried in the ground somewhere. Some seriously nasty stuff there. I don't know why any of us in the coin club would have kept this thing, but apparently we did, and it's been sitting in my collection since like 1993. Don't know why. This is a little bit nicer. We got some 1916 florin here, sterling silver, fairly heavily worn, but I believe the melt value is something on the order of $15 right now, so even just for melt, it's worth that much. As a collector's item, it's probably worth a little more than that. So we got a 1916 florin there. Here, 1962 half crown. Cooper nickel, so its value is entirely dependent on how collectible it is. These are common, obviously, these are pretty common, but this is in really nice condition. I'd say good, extremely fine here. Got some of the original mint luster still on the coin. Very little wear, if any at all. So that is a 1962 half crown, Elizabeth II, one of the last struck as they stopped making them in 1967. Let's grab a random coin here. We got us 1867 penny. Fairly normal condition for a Victorian bunhead penny there. The date is nice and clear. You can see it there at the bottom, 1867, and you can even make out a little bit of detail of the ship. And to the right of Britannia there. The shield's all worn off and the lighthouse is gone, but yeah, 1867 penny. $1953 florin. Cooper nickel again. 1953 is probably worth a little bit more than the rest in the series, since it was the year of Queen Elizabeth's coronation. It's the only year of Queen Elizabeth's reign to feature the legend Brit Om in her titles, Britanniarum Omnium of all the Britons. Due to a lot of the former British colonies gaining independence during the 1940s and 50s, this title was dropped after 1953. Let me see if I can find something else here. Yep, and this one is from 1954, the very next year. And you can see that title is no longer there. You just have Elizabeth II, Dei Gratia Regina, by the grace of God, Queen. And on the reverse, Fid Def for Fidei Defensor, Defender of the Faith, which alludes to the Queen's status as head of the Church of England. Another half crown. 1949, I think I showed this one in the last video as part of the little George VI collection I bought, but it's always nice to see it again. This was the first year after the king lost the title Indiae Imperator, Emperor of India. India became independent in 1947, and so the British Empire dropped that title after 1948. So we just see George VI, Dei Gratia Britanniarum Omnium Rex, Fidei Defensor, by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith. Grab something here. 1898. Very nice Victorian veiled head penny. Normally they come up in such terribly worn condition, but this one, you can see pretty much all the details on this thing. It's only very light wear, a little bit there at the bottom of the bust of the Queen. So it's had a light circulation. Obviously it has been circulated. There's a little ding there by Britannia's foot. It's been circulated, there is some wear, and it doesn't have any of the mint luster left, but it obviously got taken out of circulation. Somebody collected it fairly early on. And this one, you got the full titles: Victoria, Dei Gratia Britanniarum, Regina Fidei Defensor Indiae Imperator. Victoria, by the grace of God, of the Britons, Queen, Defender of the Faith, Empress of India. We got another Victorian penny here. Only this one is a copper penny. From 1860, all the base metal coinage was struck in bronze. Before then, it was pure copper, and this is one of them. It features the same reverse design that was introduced during the second coinage of George IV in 1826. This one is 1853. As you can see, it's quite heavily worn. Copper is less hard wearing than bronze, so a lot of these copper coins tend to turn up in very worn condition. but they also got took out of circulation fairly early on because when the bronze coins were introduced, the mint started recalling the old copper coins to melt them down and remake them into new bronze coins. So people started hoarding these. They were finally demonetized in 1870, but you probably wouldn't see any in circulation, very rarely, for years before then. Another penny. Are we establishing a theme here? A lot of pennies. 1912. You can see, if I can zoom in here, you've got the H mint mark for Heaton Works in Birmingham. The Heaton Works had been supplying metal for the coinage for the Royal Mint since the 1870s and 1880s. They'd been helping out by supplying some of the metal. However, occasionally they would also actually strike the coins as well, and 1912 was one of the years in which they did this. The 1912 H penny is probably the commonest of all the mint marked George V pennies, partly because even though less were made than were made at the Tower Hill Mint in London, because of the mint mark they became collectible pretty early on, and a lot of people took them out of circulation. So, well, 1912 Heaton mint mark penny. The Heaton Works would strike coins again in 1918 and 1919. These are a lot rarer. Now this is something very cool. We got us a copper halfpenny from 1724. I know I showed this off fairly recently on the channel, but as I say, it never hurts to see it again. I do like showing off my favourite acquisitions. It's pretty worn on the obverse, but you can still make out the inscription Georgius Rex and the outline of the king's portraits. And on the reverse you have Britannia holding a spear and what looks like a... I'm not sure what that is, actually, some sort of plant. And then the date beneath, 1724. As you can see, it's fairly heavily worn, but all the essentials of the design are still recognizable. So that's always fun to have. I had never had any George I coins in my collection up until now, and now I have two. Let me see if I can find the other one. Give me just a second. I think I see it. Here it is. 1717. Also a halfpenny, I believe, from the dump issue coinage. This is a little less heavily worn. You can make out the details of the king's face here. Georgius Rex has got, well, it looks like a little bit of corrosion at the top there, or maybe some damage. And again, we got Britannia on the reverse, and the date 1717. These essential elements of Britannia and the date in the exurg would be common to the base metal coinage of Britain all the way up until the 1960s. So when they started issuing the base metal coinage in the 1670s, they had no idea that they were starting a 300-year tradition. Yes, nice coins. Another copper coin, another halfpenny. This one in somewhat better condition. You can make out all the details on the shield there and all the folds in Britannia's robes. This one is Victoria, 1854. It's got a few dings on it, a few scratches, some knocks, but overall it's a pretty nice coin. Make out all the inscription and the floral design here in the excerpt. You've got the shamrock, you've got the rose, and you've got the thistle for England, Scotland, and Ireland. This, of course, was significantly before partition, so all of Ireland was technically subject to the British Crown. Another relatively recent acquisition here. We have an 1888 florin featuring the Jubilee head of Queen Victoria. This was introduced in 1887. And it replaced the young head on most of the silver coinage and the Gothic portrait on the so-called Gothic florins. So that is a 1888. As you can see, it's fairly heavily worn, but you can still make out most of the essential details. You got the 3 lines for England, you got the rampant line for Scotland, and the harp for Ireland, with the sceptres and the angles. What I believe is the symbol of the Order of the Garter in the centre there. And then you got Queen Victoria's Jubilee portrait on the obverse. Again, as I say, pretty heavily worn, but you can still make out most of the essential details. The crown on the Jubilee portrait is quite absurdly small for the Queen's head. I don't know what they were thinking when they did that, but oh no, maybe they weren't thinking very much at all. And a random penny, 1967. And no, this is not mint luster. This coin has unfortunately been cleaned, shined up. I don't know who did it or why they did it. This is an unfortunate shined coin. You know what Paul from Coin Patrol would do with this coin? It would go in the dirty mug. I, however, do not have a dirty mug, and my few shined coins just sit happily alongside the rest. Halfpenny, 1891 here. In rather nice... I'll get there in the end. In rather nice condition too, at least on the reverse. The obverse is more heavily worn. I've noticed that a lot about copper and bronze coins. The obverse is often more heavily worn than the reverse. Maybe the obverse was struck in lower relief, which is often what happened for the George V bronze coins, and that's what tended to cause the ghosting, was this striking. One side of the coin was higher relief than the other, so the outline of the king's head would bleed through onto the reverse. In fact, I may have an example somewhere. Yep. Back to the 1912 H penny, something I forgot to mention was the ghosting. You can clearly see the outline of the king's portrait struck through to the reverse of the coin. And this is actually due to the opposite way around. The king's portrait was struck in higher relief than the reverse. Britannia was struck in much lower relief, so the two sides of the coin were unbalanced, and the outline of the king's portrait could be seen on the reverse. There were various techniques suggested to fix it, including what I'm about to show you, if I can find the coin. Here we go. This was one of the techniques they attempted to use to fix the ghosting, the recessed ear variety. Nowadays, the 1915 and 1916 recessed ear coins are highly desirable. Most of them have a broken tooth near the top. Let me see if I can zoom in here. There we go. Yep, we have a broken tooth at the top between the Brit and the Om. And all the 1916 recessed ear variety pennies will have that broken tooth at the top. Some of the 1915s will as well, but not all of them. The 1915 recessed ear variety is harder to find than the 1916, but as you can see, there is still ghosting. It did not fix the problem. This would lead to the modified effigy introduced in 1927, and finally the smaller head portrait in 1928, which did seem to finally fix the problem. $1951 florin. Like I said, we're going random here. 1951 florin. Last year in which most of the coins of George VI's reign were struck. There do exist some 1952 coins, but they tend to be rarer and highly sought after. I do not believe there were any florins struck in 1952. I know there were no pennies struck in 1952 either. Sixpences and shillings can be found, but at some sort of a premium. And of course there are a lot of colonial coins struck in 1952. The king died in February of that year, which led to Elizabeth II becoming queen. She would not be crowned until 1953, and so the first coins bearing her portrait don't appear until that year. Do I have anything else fun to show off? Let's have a look at a shilling. Switch things up a bit from florins and pennies. I got a shilling, 1949. This is the Scottish reverse shilling. From 1937 to 67, all the shillings had two different reverses, the English and the Scottish. As you can see, you have a heraldic lion carrying a sword and scepter seated on a crown, the St. Andrew's Cross of Scotland, and the thistle flanking the crown. Then we got the date and fid def 1 shilling, and the king's portrait on the obverse. Fairly decently worn, probably circulated right up until the 1980s or even later. The shilling was finally demonetized in 1990 after the new smaller 5p coin was introduced in that year. And we are up to 22 minutes, so let's just throw one last coin at you. We have a 1971 2p, still with mint luster on it, from the very first year of full decimalization. The 2p penny and halfpenny of the decimal coins were the last to be introduced on decimal day. The 10p, 5p and 50p had already been introduced a couple of years earlier. This one is a nice example here. We got some mint luster on both the obverse and the reverse. You can tell it's had a fairly limited circulation. Beware of scams for these coins, because you'll see people on eBay selling these as key dates and putting premium prices on them for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. These are worth essentially face value. Hundreds of millions of them were minted. They still circulate today. They are essentially worth face value in anything less than brilliant uncirculated condition. Don't fall for the scam. Anyway, so I think that's it for the day. I'm gonna end it on one last look at the cartwheel 2p. I am going to say adios for now, and I shall see you in the next video.